For thousands of years, everyone has called this one woman a villain, the ultimate predator who tried to destroy a good man in one of the most famous stories in the Bible. But what if I told you her story isn't about temptation, but about pure terror? What if the real story isn't about lust, but about power, being trapped, and a desperate cry for help that's been ignored for centuries? The story you know makes her sound like a one-dimensional monster, but the truth is way more insane and honestly 100 times more tragic. When you actually look at the world she was stuck in, you don't see a predator, you see a prisoner. Okay, so let's quickly go over the story everyone they know. It's in the book of Genesis, and it's usually told like it's a super simple good versus evil story. Joseph gets sold into slavery by his own brothers and ends up in Egypt. But he's an absolute superstar. He gets bought by Potiphar, a super high-ranking official. And because Joseph is so good at his job, he gets promoted to manager of Potiphar's entire house. But then, disaster. Potiphar's wife starts giving Joseph the eyes. Day after day she begs him, "Lie with me." And every single day Joseph says no. He tells her it would be a crazy betrayal of his boss, and a huge sin against God. The guy's integrity is off the charts. It all explodes one day when she gets him all alone in the house. She grabs his clothes, screaming her demand. Joseph makes a split-second choice, rips away, and literally runs for his life, leaving his cloak in her hand. Humiliated, and now holding all the evidence, she completely flips the story. She calls everyone in, holds up the cloak, and tells a massive lie. She accuses Joseph of trying to assault her, making herself the victim and him the bad guy. Potiphar gets furious and throws Joseph straight into prison. In this version, it's completely clear who the good guy and the bad guy are. Joseph is the hero and Potiphar's wife is the evil villain. She's the original femme fatale, and that's where her story has always ended. But this misses the craziest part of the whole story, the world she was trapped in. To get her side of the story, we have to look at the society of ancient Egypt. For a woman like Potiphar's wife, life was a bizarre mix of insane luxury and zero power. Yeah, she had a huge house, fancy clothes, and servants for everything. But all that was just wallpaper in her prison. Now, women in ancient Egypt had more rights than in other places. They could own property and even ask for a divorce. But that is not the same as freedom. A woman's entire life was controlled by the men in her life. First her dad, then her husband. And here is the biggest clue. In the entire Bible, she is never given a name. She's only called Potiphar's wife. That's not just a small detail, it's the whole point. It shows she was seen as an extension of her husband, basically his property. It's insane that later traditions, like in Islam, actually gave her a name, Zuleika, because they knew a huge piece of her story was missing. She lived in a fancy cage, a life of comfort hiding the fact that she had no identity. She was a status symbol, and like any object, she was owned. When you see this, you stop seeing a predator and start seeing a prisoner. This entire story is about power. At the absolute top you have Potiphar, a crazy, powerful official. At the absolute bottom you have Joseph, a foreign slave with literally zero rights. And stuck right in the middle is Potiphar's wife, a woman whose entire life depended on her husband. Her power wasn't even hers, it was borrowed. This insane power difference changes every single moment of the story. This wasn't a romance. It was a ticking time bomb of class, race, and gender, and this is where it gets really crazy. There's a theory from some scholars, it's not what most people believe, but it's wild, that Potiphar might have been a eunuch. The Hebrew word for his title can also mean eunuch. If her husband was a eunuch, and that's a big if, the story completely changes. Her advances aren't just about lust anymore. They could be about crushing loneliness in a marriage that could never give her what she needed. If you look at it this way, her begging Joseph every day looks less like a command and more like a desperate cry from an isolated woman. Was she trying to seduce a slave, or was she just trying to feel a human connection in a world that treated her like an object? This doesn't make what she did okay, but it completely changes why she did it. It was never about passion, it was always about power, or her total lack of it. So if we look at this with a modern eye, her actions don't look like confident seduction. They look like desperation. You could argue this was her insane attempt to get any control over her own life. In a world where she was an object, this might have been the only way she knew how to become a person, in her own story, even if it was destructive. And then she tells the lie. Why? The simple answer is revenge. But a different reading gives a new motive, pure fear. Just imagine it for a second. She, a powerful man's wife, was just rejected by a foreign slave. What happens if tells Potiphar what happened? Who would her husband believe? the super successful servant who made him a ton of money, or his lonely wife? Her lie might not have been revenge but a desperate move to save herself. She might have destroyed him because she was terrified he would destroy her first. It was a panicked decision in a game where she knew she was completely vulnerable. This whole thing is actually a famous type of story called the Potiphar's wife motif, which is found in tons of cultures. Scholars say this story type is usually more about men's fears of women than about how women actually were. Rethinking this story is insane, and it challenges everything we thought we knew. If your mind is blown right now, you have to subscribe to the channel. Seriously, hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments, does knowing how powerless she was change how you see what she did? So, when you put it all together, what do you see? You see a new, more tragic, and way more complicated picture. Potiphar's wife isn't just a boring villain, she's a tragic figure. She isn't a monster, she's a victim of the insane system she lived in. This isn't a simple story of good versus evil. It's a tragedy about what happens when people are denied a voice, an identity, and a choice. And let's be 100% clear, this is not about excusing what she did. What she did to Joseph was horrible. He was the victim, period. But here's the insane truth. We can see he was a victim without ignoring that she was one too. They are tragically tied together. She was a victim of a system that made her desperate, and in her desperation she used the only weapons that system gave her, and made Joseph a victim too. This is the tragic cycle of oppression, where powerless people trying to survive end up hurting others who are just as vulnerable. It's crazy that other traditions, like in Islam, wanted to give her more of a story. There she is named Zuleika, and her story is often told with deep regret and even redemption. This just proves that people for centuries have known that the original story just isn't the whole story. In the end, the story of Potiphar's wife isn't just about a lie, it's about the crushing, silent forces that made that lie feel like her only option. It's the story of a desperate cry for help from inside a golden cage, a cry that's been misheard as seduction for literally thousands of years. It makes you wonder how many other people in history have been turned into villains because we ignore the world they were trapped in. Whose story should we re-examine next? By asking these questions, we don't just see the past in a new way. We see the hidden power dynamics that are still shaping our world right now. Thanks for watching. If this video blew your mind, please share it, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next investigation into the stories that define us. We'll see you in the comments.